Hopefully that was in my slide. Second, you will be on mute as is standard for webinars now, but please feel free to bring up your questions. We will have a general Q&A at the tail end of the session. As this is a fireside chat, we will have a panelist Q&A just to unpack some of the discussions as speakers after each speaker. So we'll have that in between speakers, and we'll have a general Q&A which is open to all of your questions at the tail end. So please send in your questions as you think about them so we can address them at the end. And last but not the least, this is an open session. This is a session dedicated for nonprofits. So there are no stupid questions. We encourage you to ask, we encourage you to learn. So please take this wonderful opportunity to do that. Next up, a quick intro. I promise it's going to be really quick. I am from an organization called TechSoup. We operate at about 236 countries. We are a nonprofit, just like you. And our key mission is to support other nonprofits, just like you, all across the globe. While our idea is to support them through access to technology, we understand the value of having thematic topics such as business continuity, fundraising, diversification of revenue, and so on, because these are also just as essential to the sustainability of nonprofits. So we really are happy to partner and collaborate with Blackbaud on this. That being said, there will be, we also do offer Blackbaud discounts, but I will be sharing more of these later on and through the follow-up content. I don't want to take up too much of your time because we have an amazing session ahead. I will be passing you to our facilitator, Rodney.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that, Jed. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join our session today. We have quite a few expert guests here, including Greg Simmons from Blackbaud, NILS, and our panel of speakers. But let me first introduce myself for those of you that don't already know me. Promise to make it a quick one. I'm Rodney from Catalyst for Social Good, CSG for short. So what CSG is, we are a full service consulting agency, and we offer services in direct marketing campaigns, for example, mailing campaigns and online digital campaigns, a lot on donor acquisition and fundraising, getting more money for your organization. CSG is also an official technology implementation partner for a few technology platforms, such as Blackbaud, sponsor for today, and Catalyzer, amongst others, covering areas of database, CRM, CSR, and ESG, and social impact measurement and reporting. So it's quite a broad range of areas that our services covers. So if you have any interest in those, happy to please, reach out to me, and happy to take you through them in more detail. So quickly diving into today's session. Today's session follows on from our previous webinar, which was entitled Addressing Fundraising Challenges in Times of COVID. I think we heard from a panel of speakers there from Red Cross and American Club Foundation, and they shared their advice on how organizations can better plan their fundraising approaches from both a foundation grantor and a mature charity's point of view, especially during these challenging COVID times. So today's session, Planning for Business Continuity, a guide for nonprofits, is a follow-up on that. And we're hoping to provide more direct insights as to how charities are actioning on those plans. With Love News, of course, giving us a view from a charity who has planned through and is in the process of diversifying their fundraising channels. And Strategic Grants today with Joe. Strategic Grants have worked with many grantors and grantees, and will hopefully give us some advice, some useful advice from a developed fundraising market point of view. What funders are increasingly looking for in terms of business continuity and sustainability from their charity grantees. So I'm sure a lot of you will be very interested in that. I want to directly introduce both of our speakers now. Our first speaker, Jodi Vongsakoun, began her career in the US sports marketing industry after graduating from Cornell University. In 2008, she followed her passion to the non-for-profit sector, holding roles in management in both US and Singapore NGOs, specializing in fundraising, impact measurement, program management, and project management. So there's quite a wide range of expertise Jodi's bringing to the table here. Jodi joined Love NILS as the development director in 2020, and she is currently the COO, focused on strategic growth and sustainability for the organization. Now, our second speaker today, is Joe Garner. Joe Garner is the director of strategic grants and has worked with nonprofits since 1994. And she established strategic grants in 2009. Joe and the team worked with peak bodies, funders, and charities across Australia and New Zealand to help the not-for-profits increase their capacity to win grants and deliver vital community projects, whilst also encouraging effective philanthropic support. Now, Joe and her team has worked on successful grants and tenders ranging from 5,000 to 50 million Australian dollars. So a very wide range of grants there that Joe has worked on and is experienced with. So she and her team also assist a growing number of funders with defining their grant application, guidelines, and application processes. So I'm sure a lot of you would be hoping to get some insights from Joe. Okay. Now, without further ado, I'd like to pass the podium to Jodi from Love NILS to share her experience. So over to you, Jodi.
Okay. Thanks so much, Rodney, and it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. I'll give you a little bit of an introduction about Love NILS. As Rodney said, I'm the COO for the organization, and we are a Singapore-based charity. We work with children with cancer. Our mission is to provide psychosocial support to the children with cancer and the caregivers and family members that are traveling that journey with them. So we're looking at healthcare guidance, emotional care, social and community care, the sort of non-medical needs that are often not getting much attention. And our organization was founded in 2017 by Leslie Berggren. Leslie, her son at age 13 was diagnosed with a rare form of lymphoma, and she took care of him as he was treated here in Singapore at National University Hospital, and he was also treated over in the US at Seattle Children's Hospital. And what she found in the differences with the healthcare system was that in Singapore, the healthcare is second to none, but there weren't a lot of other supports built into the system. So with a teenage son in the hospital all the time, she found it difficult to engage him on a daily basis and to keep his spirits up. Whereas when they were treated in the US, a lot of those supports were built into the healthcare system. So NILS beat his cancer, but tragically lost his life to complications from the stem cell treatment that saved his life initially. So he passed away after 2 years of care in the US, and Leslie came home to Singapore to take care of NILS's twin sister, Claire. And she felt like she had a lot of experience in that space of being a family going through the trauma of childhood cancer diagnosis. And she wanted to spread some hope to those families and help support them. So she started off doing some toy drives and collecting toys and dropping them to the hospital, and founded Love NILS in 2017, and then was able to raise $100,000 in her first year to donate to National University Hospital to create a care coordinator position. And that position still exists now and is integral to the pediatric oncology unit. She supports the families as they kind of navigate, when a family comes in and hears a childhood cancer diagnosis, they're hit with so much information and they're trying to navigate, what does that look like? What does the healthcare system look like? How do we do this? And so that care coordinator helps her navigate that process. Those families navigate that process. And the reality of the cancer battle is that childhood cancer diagnosis is traumatic for the entire family. You've got a child that is unwell and dealing with all the fallout of not being able to go to school and not being able to see friends and just battling cancer itself. And then on the family, it's a huge burden as well, because generally one parent has to quit their job to be a full-time caregiver. There's a lot of isolation and helplessness. So Love NILS mission is to provide support to those families and to fill the gaps where they're maybe not getting that support through the medical system. So these are our pillars. We have some therapies that we do, we provide support, and we do a lot of awareness building in the community. We work with local schools and we do a lot of speaking engagements to try to get the word out there around childhood cancer and to help build a community of support around these families. I'll go into our programs a little bit because later on when we're talking about grants and restricted funding and program specific funding, you'll see that we have both the benefit and the drawback of fitting into many different areas. So our programs, the care coordinator, which I spoke about, she is a position in the hospital that we fund, and she supports families and does home visits to make sure the children's environment is safe for them to go home to. Education support, we started this program on request from the head of pediatric oncology at NUH. Kids can't go to school when they have cancer. They have compromised immune systems, and I'm sure you can understand with COVID, that's especially hard for them right now. And so they fall behind in school. They're often on medications and treatments that present learning challenges for them. So we have specialized one-on-one tutoring for them. And all of our programs are at no cost to the beneficiaries. Open art sessions and art kits. We used to have art therapy in the hospitals. We can't be in the hospitals right now because of COVID, so we had to tailor our programs. And now our art therapists especially curate home delivery art kits that go to the homes and the hospital wards. And we also do online art sessions now. Exploro is an online avatar system where kids can explore the hospital virtually before they go in for treatments to help reduce the fear surrounding some of the treatments. Our toy market, that's sort of where our roots were, and it's still a big event for us every year. Right now with COVID, we don't do one big festive day at the hospital anymore. We do twice monthly drops of toys to the hospitals. But we find that there's more and more requests for that from the doctors and nurses to keep an ongoing supply of toys for them to provide to the kiddos who are going through terrible treatments and jabs, and just providing them with a little bit of positivity in the days that they're in the hospital. T-shirt masterpiece. So this program, kids can create artwork and we put it on a t-shirt for them. And it also helps us drive awareness because we use it to promote our programs and the stories of all of these children. Pen Pal Project is one of our community initiatives that kids from local schools and some people from corporates are sending messages of hope and support to kiddos in the hospital and doctors and nurses. Calendar of Hope is on hold for us right now, but we get lots of free tickets to send families to events that they often otherwise would not be able to afford to go to with their kids because cancer treatment is expensive and often bankrupts families. And Captain America is actually happening for us today in celebration of Children's Day here in Singapore. Captain America's on Zoom now. He can't go to the hospital, but we still deliver toys and superhero costumes to all the kiddos and balloons to the pediatric wards so that they have a really festive environment in there today. So at last count, we have 38 kiddos signing on to that Zoom later on today, and they do some online activities, which is fun. So this is just a little bit about our impact. We're supporting 2 hospitals. NUH is our strongest partner. We also do some work with KKH Hospital here. And yeah, and our people. So how we sustain, I know the focus of this is on our growth. So in 2017, Leslie started the organization as a one-man band. She had some dedicated volunteers, but all of the fundraising was really out of that network that she had, her personal contacts, and she was able to raise a lot of money. Now, as we've grown, we grew very quickly, and our budgets, of course, had to increase with that. And so we needed more funding sources. We hired our first full-time staff, well, actually part-time staff, but our first paid staff in January of 2020. And I came on at that time as a volunteer development director to help Leslie navigate some of the funding challenges. And immediately it was clear that we needed to diversify our funding, our network of individual donors, but as well as the reach that we were having into the community with our funding. So we've got now 4 fundraising streams that we focus on. The first being individual, which is where our roots are. Second is corporates, then foundations, and then government grants. We have been lucky here in Singapore. The government released some funding to help assist charities during COVID, one of which was a matching grant. And so we've been able to raise some funds that were then matched by the government for that grant, which was a huge benefit to us. And this is what we've been able to do from 2018 to 2021. You can see 2018, we were primarily individual. We had a little bit of corporate support by way of event sponsorship. But now in 2021, despite COVID, we've been able to diversify, and we've got some grant funding, some government funding, some corporate funding. And then we also work with school groups who do some fundraising for us, which is great. But all of this, through all of this, we were tracking, as anyone from a small nonprofit can identify with, we were tracking everything in spreadsheets. And we didn't have a good sense of who our donors were, who they really were, how often they were giving to us. And so we looked at investing in a CRM, and we did get some grant support to start that up, but that's made a huge difference for us. We're just in the baby stages of being able to use it and develop it, but it will help us for sure know who our donors are and help us have a more targeted approach to reaching out to those folks. And then I see for our organization, our pillars of success being ensuring impact for our beneficiaries. So that's always down to impact measurement, and not just the outputs, the numbers that you're serving, the count that you're serving, but the impact that your programs are having on them. And also, are you running the right programs for your beneficiaries? Are you serving their actual needs? Or are you serving the needs you think they have? I think those are important questions to ask. So keeping an open feedback loop is super helpful to make sure that the organization is relevant and that you're serving the need that exists. And then developing the strong storytelling. I think for us at Love NILS, we have a lot of strong stories. We're dealing with kiddos with cancer, and there's so many stories to be told there, but still we can always do it better. We can always tell the stories better. And the stories are the way that you inspire your donors to give or your volunteers to become engaged. And so I cannot, I cannot understate the importance of knowing what your story is and telling it strongly. And then building outreach and awareness, because even if you are doing great work and nobody knows about it, you can't be that effective. So you always have to build those community partnerships or have speaking engagements, just getting other people to know about the good work that you're doing. Nurturing your relationships with your supporters. It's sort of, you need to know who those supporters are and why they support you, and then build those relationships with them the best you can. That is ongoing work for any organization. And it's always a scramble for us as we grow, for sure. And developing the manpower capacity. So I know this is a tricky one because you need manpower to be able to develop it. And a lot of times it's tough to get funding for that manpower, but developing the capacity of the staff and volunteers and anyone that you come into contact with to be an advocate for your organization so that you can get your message out there is important. So yeah, we've had, I guess the takeaway for our organization is that we've had tremendous growth. We've been able to diversify a bit, but we definitely needed more systems in place over the last year. And the CRM is helping us to develop a more strategic approach to what we're doing. And it's hard to be caught up in the moment, especially when you're a small nonprofit with limited resources, but you're caught up in the day-to-day, but you also need to maintain that strategic vision of where you need to go and what you need to do so you don't miss out on opportunities as they present themselves. So yeah, I think that's it for me.
Very cool. Thanks for that sharing, Jodi. I actually, I'm going to open the floor to the rest of the panel as well, so that anyone who has questions for you can actually just jump in. But I'm gonna jump in first with the first question, if you don't mind. I saw that your diversification process was a little bit different from what I usually notice from developing charities, and that is you actually have a pool of individual donors before you went out to get grants from grantors and foundations and so on. So usually it's the other way around. Most charities start off with, a founding grantor or a major donor who gives them a grant before they start diversifying into the individuals. I suppose when you say individuals, could you give us some clarity as to how the individuals were coming in, and then maybe the size as well, or the volume you're talking about, just so that our audience can actually have a sense as to your organizational skills. We're not talking about like a huge
Yeah.
Yes.
So, like I said, when Leslie started the organization, she really just pulled on her network of folks that she knew, and those were the individual donors that started off the organization. She just had this dream of raising the money to put this position into NUH Hospital, and she was able to raise the money, which was great. And then we parlayed that into an event, a fundraising event, an annual one. And so people come and they feel inspired, and that was great until COVID hit. Now we do it online. But we had about, coming into January, we had a database of about 3,000 supporters. And they were given, again, without a CRM, I can't give you the statistics of who was donating how often and how much, but we had a fairly decent donor base. But a lot of it was coming in around our individual events that were happening every year. That was the big driver for donations. And then we got some traction on crowdfunding platforms and some media exposure. And we've had a huge crowdfunding campaign through giving.sg here in Singapore. And that has, almost doubled our donor base at this point, which is phenomenal, but also a little scary because we don't know how dependent we can be on these donors, right? They're all coming in out of the blue. So it's an excellent problem to have, but it was a windfall. It was unexpected. So we have grown that way. And I think individual donors it's unpredictable sometimes. And so that's one of the reasons that I also wanted to diversify the funding so that we had different streams coming in, because anything, with nonprofit, you have to be careful that things don't dry up on you.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thanks, Jodi. Sorry, this is Jed here. Quick two things. First and foremost, to those joining us, please, a quick heads up, this is a fireside chat, so we will have this panel-driven Q&A in between speakers, but we will have a general Q&A at the end of the session itself. Now, to my question though, the growth of your diversification is super impressive within a short span of 3 years. I see that this is going to be an interesting talking point, particularly for smaller nonprofits who historically have just relied on a single source of revenue. However, I do project as well that for a smaller nonprofit, the initial roadblock will be having a conversation with their board or their CEO that is otherwise rather more conservative in terms of changing up their systems, particularly now during times of uncertainty in funding. What are the tips, or how will you help them navigate that conversation with their leaders or their board?
Yeah, I think it's important to go in prepared for the conversation regarding the funding priorities of the organizations you're approaching. So really knowing your alignment with a funder or your potential alignment. You don't want to leave anything to chance. You want it to be super obvious how you align, why you're important, and what they can do to help these beneficiaries. You need to make them feel the impact, I think. And sometimes there just won't be alignment with some funders, right? It's just, we can't apply for grants that deal with food security. It just doesn't work. But there are some ways that we can tap into different conversations about education, because we have education support, or health, because we're helping kids with cancer. So what I try to do is just go into meetings really well prepared on how what I'm presenting aligns with what they're trying to do, because you're almost selling yourself as a solution, right? A philanthropic solution to them needing to give their money away, hopefully. So that's the way I try to approach it, for better or worse. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. I'm not sure if the question got lost. So, were you actually asking Jodi how she approached her board to invest in the internal capacity building systems
Oh.
Yeah.
rather than
But-
external funders? Yes.
That was the original question, but I also got a really helpful other answer to that. So thank you, Jodi, actually. That's another
Yeah.
note for me.
Sorry about that. So to the other question, I think our board saw the value in what we were trying to do. And I think, yeah, we just tried to paint the picture of what we were missing and why we needed the investment in a CRM. But we also were able to go after grant sources. So that helped. If there hadn't been a grant source, it might have been a harder sell to invest. But I think they saw the need for us to grow our fundraising, and we needed a system in place to help us do that. So, yeah.
Okay, understand. Has it been, you know, I mean, you were the director of development, so usually asking for budgets from from your board and the stakeholders, it's a process, I would say, and it's quite it can be quite a technical conversation. How important would you say is the board's support for your organizational growth and your fundraising objectives, if you would, in getting that sort of investment and getting that sort of buy-in and support from the board level?
Yeah, I think this is a classic challenge globally, to have an engaged board that helps you raise funds. And I think I'm trying to shift the narrative so the board understands that it's also their role to be involved in opening their networks and making connections. Even if they don't feel comfortable making an ask, if they can open their network and just get us a meeting, that often can help. So yeah, I think having a fundraising board is key to the success and health of an organization. And it's tricky to get there, especially, I mean, in some, in Singapore, there are a lot of boards that have been in place for a long time, and they're not used to being fundraising boards. So it can be a hard shift, but everybody has to be on the same page about it, for sure.
Thank you for sharing that. I think as fundraisers, we all have we all share collective experience and collective pain in
Yes.
in that regard, trying to sell to our board. Yes. Any other questions from the rest of our panel? Maybe Joe, would you want to ask? Jodi?
I do, thank you. Thanks, Jodi. That was so interesting, and I'm glad to hear we have a lot of the same key messaging coming through. So everybody will have no excuse for not knowing what to do after this webinar. I did just want to ask, though, for organisations who are just starting out, often there are questions on a funder's application form around what your plan is to sustain the work that you're doing. So how did you tackle that one in your first tranche of grant applications?
I think this is really a tricky question, right? I think
it is.
It triggers me a little, that question, I think, because to sustain, you need funding sources, and nobody wants to be your consistent funding source. So it's a total catch-22. I think the way we did it is just to talk about the different sources that we were pursuing for our funding. Great. That was the only way, so that folks would know that they weren't the only source funding us. So we would say, oh, we're gonna, pursue this many grant opportunities, or we're gonna go after this, or we have this. And for us, like, we were building the capacity in our fundraising program. So we mentioned that as something that would help sustain, but it's just a really difficult question, yeah, to navigate.
Yeah, I think that's the advice we certainly give, is exactly what you've said around that. These are our plans moving forwards, and this is what we're doing to make sure that we realize those goals.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, we're still really small. You know, we've just applied for 4 grants this quarter, but we had last year, our foundation funding was only made up of 3 grants. So, you know, we're still in that growth stage for sure, and still answering some of those initial questions about where we're going and what we're doing. So I think we've been fairly successful, but it's tough.
Yeah.
And Jodi, as a extension to that question, do you think having that pool of individual donors in place, did that help with those initial discussions?
I don't know, but I have to think the fact that we had sustained for a couple years without some of those sources may have helped us. The fact that we had a track record of being able to raise some money to support ourselves, that maybe that would help. I don't know. Joe probably has a much better idea on that than I would, but yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I do think that the fact that you could prove that you were serious about it, more to the point, I guess, that you knew what you were doing, that you had a clear fundraising plan, that you realised that you couldn't just rely on individual donors, that even though you've done a great job doing it. And I think too, it's about showing the commitment of the board and leadership behind the organisation delivering its mission. And I really loved your great infographic that you brought up that very succinctly showed what your outputs, outcomes and impacts are. I thought that was brilliant. And I think that's a really key element to being able to show this is our mission and this is how we're going to do it. And this is what we've done so far.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jodi, one more question from me. So on your the pie graphic as well, I noticed that school groups was an area that had actually, I was interested in how you sort of work with the school groups and what capacity and how that sort of developed into a fundraising element.
Yeah, so we work with 7 schools right now, and we have a program where we try to, I don't know how it works in other school systems, but in Singapore and a lot of international schools and some local schools, they have service clubs. And the service clubs get involved with different charity organizations, and usually for a year, they sort of commit to them. And one of the things that Leslie, because she lost her son as a teenager, she's been really committed to sort of growing the philanthropy and the knowledge base around for kiddos and high schools and younger. And so one thing, she'll go out and present to them. We sort of let them drive some initiatives of outreach to the kiddos in the hospitals. And one thing that's come out of that is fundraising drives. So they'll often do a day where they raise money, or recently it was International Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And so we had a couple schools that sold gold ribbons for us to raise funding. So it's turned into a small fundraising stream, but it's really nice to see the kids engaged.
Yeah.
So it sort of serves multi-purpose.
Yeah, connection and awareness and engagement is just as important.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool, great.
Yeah.
Jodi, a follow-up question from me on that in your diversification, and it's regarding do you actually have a prioritization regarding your unrestricted sources of income versus your restricted sources of income? Love this question. Always comes up, isn't it?
I mean, my priority would always be unrestricted sources of income because they're easier to navigate. Yeah, I think because we grew out of an individual donor base, that will always be our #1 outreach source. But
and the unrestricted is coming from the individuals?
No, unrestricted. Yeah, unrestricted is individuals for us, for sure. Sometimes people want to donate to a specific program, but it's rare. The restricted funding comes more around program-specific grant applications or folks that want to come in and just fund hard costs of a program, which is really difficult. So yeah, I think, sorry about that. So the goal would always be to access as many unrestricted funding sources as possible. Yeah, so we're going after those first.
Yes. And of course, do you have a monthly giving or a regular giving program in place to give you cash flow? You're on mute, Jodi, so you need to unmute.
Sorry, it was temporary because my children are on home-based learning and someone printed something into my office. Yay!
No problem.
Sorry about that. Anyway, do we have a monthly? We've just done our first monthly cash flow for this year, and we have goals, but I would say they're more quarterly than monthly for our fundraising.
All right. All right. Okay, with that, I'd like to thank you for that sharing, Jodi. I think we're within time, just a little bit over time, but I would like to pass the podium over on to Joe, the virtual podium. So over to you, Joe. We're all very excited for your sharing. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions after this.
Okay, thanks so much, Rodney. That was fantastic, Jodi. Thank you. Okay, so as I said in one of my questions and comments back to Jodi, there's a lot of the same messaging, which means it must be true. So take away all the fabulous hints that you're getting from this session today. So just a little bit about who we are. So we work specifically with nonprofit or for purpose, as we like to call them, organisations across Australia and New Zealand to help them build sustainable, cost-effective grant-seeking strategies so that you can get the money that you need in to deliver the projects that will fulfil your mission. And what our aim is, our overall vision, is to apply for all organisations to apply strategic thinking to their service delivery and fundraising programs. So we do a lot of capacity building, training, education, etc. So just to start off, I guess the biggest question, or one of the key questions, and I'm sure you're all well aware of this, being based across Southeast Asia, is what the effect has had on COVID. And like the rest of the world, it's been pretty dynamic. We've seen generally pretty good responses from government, and also generally the philanthropic community globally, as it would appear, has really rallied. They know that even though they were faced with an uncertainty as well at the beginning of last year, they have now really rallied and are working together and working with their beneficiaries to look at ways that they can continue giving to their partners in a time where it's more needed than ever. So, you know, there's just a few things from the Asia Pacific Foundation there. And this really reiterates one of the key messages that we had with the organisations that we worked with, is ringing your funders and speaking to them if ever anything like COVID, heaven forbid that doesn't happen again. But whenever anything in your program delivery or project delivery for which you're holding funds has been affected by something, then you need to keep that line of communication open with them. And so it's great to see that that tact has been taken by many foundations across the world, as illustrated there in that quote from Asia Pacific Foundation, who's been keeping in regular open contact with all grantees, and then did a first check-in, first to understand what the impact was going to be, and then secondly, let them know about the intention to be a little more flexible about project milestones, timelines, and reporting deadlines. So that's been fairly common from what we've seen, which is a really positive thing, one of the few positives that have come. And of course, we've seen a lot of, again, philanthropic support, the Give to Asia. Hopefully you've all received a little bit of that. So Give to Asia has distributed money right through Asia, as you can see from the graph on the screen. So, you know, all in all, what the trends are looking like now, philanthropy is still alive and well. Government is still supporting the community. But probably the biggest impact, which is a negative, is that the competition for grant funding is higher than I have ever seen it. And I think that we're ever likely to see it because so many other fundraising types were so badly affected by the repercussions of COVID, not being able to have events and face-to-face and all of those things. Everybody's just turned to grants because they think they're the easy things. They're the easy way to get money in the door. Well, as you heard from Jodi, it's not easy. And I can assure you, having worked in this sector for a long time, that it's not easy, it's hard, and you do need to apply a strategic approach. So let's understand a little bit about what funders expect and how do they actually make the decision when they get your application through. First thing they're going to do is to check your eligibility. So it is astounding to us how many funders still report that they receive as high as 20% of the applications that simply don't meet the eligibility criteria. So you're not doing yourself any favors by applying for a funding round if you really clearly aren't eligible or if your project doesn't meet the guidelines. So going on to that second point, making sure that you can tick all of the boxes. They often will have a set of criteria and guidelines. Make sure that you can address all of those in your application's responses. They also look at responses that really clearly answer the questions very, very succinctly. You know, the funders' words are being repeated back to them about how the project is going to deliver the certain things that they want to see with their money, and then back it up with the strategic, or the strategies, I should say, around how you're going to achieve the goals. And making sure that we're not just putting broad, fluffy statements in there, but that we've got hard stats and facts, and that we've got testimonials from people, and that we can say, and there are 50% of other cases just like this one that can report the same success, for example. And the big one, and we talked about this in our chat with Jodi just now, is that the funder actually trusts you. So Love NILS has been able to really show their success and how they got themselves up and running through individual giving, and that they were then able to actually make some things happen to fulfill the mission of the organisation. So they've got a track record of success, albeit small initially, absolutely, but they have been able to demonstrate success. And that is how you get a funder to trust you. You've got to be able to show them that you know what to do and that it's working, and some of the results to date. So when that trust exists, that is when they will have confidence in investing in your organisation, no matter how early on in your fundraising program you are, or your development. So here are the top 10 things that we consider are essential for business continuity and grant success. You must have and be able to explain to any donor that you're asking for a major gift or a grant from what your strategic objectives are. So what is your mission statement, and what are the objectives that you're going to carry out to fulfill that mission? Do you have a set of organizational key messages? And that's a big one. We'll go through a separate slide on that point. But what we want to ensure is that there's a consistent document with all of the key criteria or key responses that you can use, not just in grant applications and corporate proposals, but on your website. Because when a funder gets an application from you, if they haven't heard of your organisation before, the first place they're going to look is Google. They're going to look up your website or your Facebook page or whatever your web presence might look like. And they're going to look for consistency in the key messaging on your web presence and with the information that you've put into your grant application or proposal. So as I said, clear and current website or at least a web presence. Active social media accounts are fantastic. And in fact, they're a great way to engage with donors and to put up case studies. Do you have, and Jodi touched on this one, a really clear list of what it is that you need the funding for? And does it match what that specific funder wants to invest in the community? So it's up to you now. You've got your strategic plan, your mission, your strategic plan. What are the projects that you need funding for to deliver those objectives and fulfill your organisational mission? You're going to need then strong evidence of need around each of those projects and what it will achieve and how you're going to do it. And again, we've got a separate slide on that point. Prospect research and donor relationships. Again, Jodi highlighted this one beautifully, and I cannot implore how important that relationship piece is in your grants programs, whether you are dealing with a government grant funder, a corporate partner, a philanthropic, or an individual donor. The relationship management is essential and it does take time. It is something that your board can certainly and should certainly be helping with. And do you have off that, and I have seen the question come through the Q&A box, and we will try to address that, if not in this session, at a later time, a list of the funding deadlines. We do in Australia and New Zealand, but that's of no help to you. And do you have somebody to write the applications in-house, or do you need to outsource that? Do you need to find a volunteer with good writing skills, etc.? As again, echoing Jodi, a CRM or a donor database is critical. It's how you're going to be sure that you are managing all of your donor relationships effectively and efficiently. The development plan to diversify that revenue base, absolutely critical. So if you're new and you're just starting out, again, you can just say, well, this is our plan. This is what we plan to do year 1, year 2, year 3. These are our financial targets. It's good to have some explanation as to how you arrived at the estimates. So have you actually done some research and consulted with some prospective donors about their enthusiasm to potentially support your organisation? And what is your ability to know whether what you're doing is working and how well it's working? So can you measure your own performance as an organisation? And then can you measure the performance of individual projects so that when a funder asks what are the outputs and outcomes, you can explain what potentially they're going to be. And when it comes back to the funder reporting period, then you can show them some information that backs that up. Yes, we have measured and here's the data to reinforce it. Again, we'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a moment. So your organisation's key messages. What does your organisation do? Be clear. What is the mission? Why does it do it? So what's the need for it? What's the gap in the market? What is your point of differentiation between other similar organisations? That is a really critical point because no donor wants to see a whole lot of replication going on in any community. How long have you been doing it? Why it's needed? Who it helps? Be really specific about your target group, okay? And how it helps those individuals. And collate all of this information and other commonly required information that you're often asked into one easily located reference file. And in that include case studies and keep them updated. And that way you've got one central repository of information that different people in your organization can go to, whether they be working on a corporate proposal, a grant funding submission, whatever it might be. And that's particularly important if you're using volunteers, that they're all using the right language that you want and the right stats and facts about your organization. So your project descriptions and plans then. So for each project that you're looking for funding support, you need to be able to answer all of these questions. And if you can't answer these questions, then you would say, well, is that project grant ready? Okay, so you must be able to answer these questions, because what funders expect is that from the time the money hits your bank account, that you can start the project straight away. So you must be able to answer these questions really clearly. What is the aim or the goal of the project? Who it's going to help? So be specific about the target group. So while your organization might have a target group that's quite broad generally, this specific project might target a very particular cohort within that bigger target area. What's the need for the actual project and how do you know it? Okay, and use evidence and data. So again, funders really want to know at a project level, now we're talking, what the particular need and gap is for a service or a product or whatever it is. From the time then that you get the funding, what are the activities or tasks that are going to happen to make that project happen? Are there any risks? There are always risks. There's always a chance something's going to go a little bit off kilter. So what a funder wants to know is you've got a contingency plan and you've thought about it. And if you're collaborating with other organisations, if you've got volunteers helping, make sure that all of that information comes into your project plan. And again, and Jodi touched briefly on the difference between what an output and an outcome is. So this is a very, very important point. When a funder asks what the outcomes of a project are going to be, they don't want to just know about numbers of people helped and the number of areas and the number of occasions of help or service that you've given people. They want to know what the change is as a result of you doing that. Okay, so that's the outcome, is the change or a benefit that's occurred. So it might be increased access to health, greater emotional support for families who have got children going through cancer treatments, et cetera, et cetera. And then an impact is what is the sustained change over a longer period of time. So if you're providing early literacy or getting women out of domestic violence situations, the skills that you're potentially arming them with, not just removing them from immediate danger, but then perhaps you're doing work with them to help them identify how to avoid getting into future potential situations, that's impactful. That's changing the long-term course of people's lives potentially. And then how you're going to actually measure the change. Okay, so often it will require data to be collected at the very start of the project, and then at the midway point through the project, and then at the end of the project, so that you can see how you're tracking. So I believe that might be something that Rodney's group can help you with, but I'm sure he'll jump in and let you know that. And the budget. Make sure that the budget is based on real figures, that you're not using estimates. It's very odd when we review funding applications that have very nice, neat, round figures. Use real costs, get quotes, use real salaries and things like that. So moving on to the building and sustaining donor relationships, it starts right at the beginning. So as soon as you've identified a prospective funder that you think you can go to, you read the guidelines and you make sure that your project is eligible and it's the right fit. Always try to talk to a funder before you put in an application. Always try and have a phone call. And a great thing to start the phone call off with is, I've read your guidelines. I've looked at your website. If you have 5 minutes, I just have a couple more questions to ask you. So always let them know that you've done your research before you want to talk to them. And if you can't get hold of them on the phone, send them an email. Sometimes I'll reply, sometimes not. But if you're sure, then if you've tried every effort to get in touch with them, you're sure your project still meets all the eligibility guidelines, go ahead and put your application. When you get a grant, you call and say thank you. All right, it's astounding again how many funders report to us that they have to chase their reports and their receipts and things like that, and they don't get thank you calls. So make sure you do that. Again, keep them informed of how the project's going, and if anything's going skew-if, let them know straight away. Don't miss the reporting deadlines, okay? And tell them what they want to know. And again, provide case studies and pictures wherever you can. A picture speaks 1,000 words, they say. And make sure that the donor is happy and that you've just not met their expectations, but you've actually exceeded them. So where you want to get to is that they ask you, do you need more money? And that's a winning result. So just quickly, reasons for not being successful. Unfortunately, as I said, funders still get a lot of ineligible applications and just poor quality applications. So the questions aren't answered well enough for them to rate the application well. There are so many applications being presented. So I think it's really great that that Love NILS is only putting in a few applications every year, because they're doing the quality control check. And they're only going for the ones where they think this is a really strong chance for us. And that would be my advice. It's quality, not quantity. And yes, we've talked about that one extensively already, so I won't dwell on that, but it is important to acknowledge that grants are only one part of your revenue base. You should never put all your eggs in one basket, and look at diversification where you can. That's me. Thanks, Rodney.
Thank you for that, Jo. Great sharing on that. I see there are a few more questions popping into the Q&A, so we'll come to that a little bit later. But I suppose, first off, from me, I actually have a few questions already, so I hope they're not too difficult. I was just wondering if you could give a sense of, you mentioned competitors in the grant application process, and
yeah,
some of our audience might be pretty new to the grant application process, or just starting off. How many competitors are you talking about sometimes with some of these applications, just to give them a sense? Maybe.
Oh, it's really however many applications are received in any given funding round. So in Australia, boy, there can be 1,500 applications in one funding round, for example. So, and maybe
1,500 competitors.
1,500, that's right. And so, maybe only 250 of those will be funded. So that's very high competition.
Yes, that's
yeah.
great.
Yeah, so it's the competitive things. Really, I'm talking about how many other applications in a total funding round are you looking at. So that information is usually available on a funder's website. They usually will have some statistics around how many applications they receive on average and how many projects were funded. And that gives you a sense of that success rate right there.
All right. We don't have that level of transparency yet in Asia, mostly from the
okay.
Yeah. I know in developed markets, the transparency is much higher. So in Asia, it's there's opaqueness to the application process. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
The other thing I wanted to ask, I'm sorry if I'm taking up more questions from the panel, but I was wondering if you could give the audience a sense of how long might some of the a typical, let's say, grant application process from maybe the procurement to writing the the proposal to submitting it, and then the approvals, the back and forth before you actually get the money in the bank.
Yeah, again, it varies from funder to funder. So there are some funders, and I'm sure it's the same there, that only have annual grant rounds. And then there are others that will have, you can apply any time, but their trustees may only meet once a quarter. And that all comes down to doing that really detailed prospect research to find all that information out so that you can time your application with when the result is likely. And that way you know that you're going to get the funds in time for when you want to start the project.
Yes. And of course, all that information should be kept in your CRM too.
Yeah, it should.
For your application. Yes. Any other questions from the panel? Jodi, do you have any questions to Jo? No?
Not right now. I'm just absorbing all of her great advice.
Rodney, I think there's so many great questions coming from the audience. Yeah, I don't want to get in the way of those.
Maybe I can plug. Sorry, I actually do have. I'm always filled with questions, and the last one I actually had written up was to Jo is, are you seeing an increase in unrestricted funding from institutional donors, and what, if not, what about an increase in the administration cost percentage that's allowed under the grant to cover the grantees' overheads? And also, last one, if the grant nature has changed, more towards capacity building grants and helping the operational needs of the charities as well.
Yeah, great. Okay. So Untied, I certainly know quite a number of funders and not-for-profits who have great relationships, and the funder now says to them, look, here's the money. We know you know what you're doing. You just tell us in 12 months what you've done with it. That comes from a long-term partnership. That sort of trust isn't going to just happen. They want to, have evidence of working with you and knowing that you will deliver and that you will use the money where it is most needed. There is a growing conversation out of the States. Certainly it's been going for a long time from philanthropic funders who I've heard at different philanthropy conferences when they've been presenting in our part of the world, really putting the emphasis on that to philanthropic funders globally to acknowledge that organizations need money to turn their lights on. Give them the money to turn their lights on, because without that, they can't do everything else, in terms of their mission delivery. So there is a growing conversation, and I think that we have seen an increase in capacity building funding and a little bit more leniency towards operational cost funding through COVID.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for that knowledge. So if there are no other questions from the panel, I will pass. Yes, go on, Jodi.
I have just a bit of advice too to smaller organizations just starting out is the way that you think about your overhead costs, because a lot of times organizations don't think about the manpower required to implement a program. So they may think of all of their salary cost as overhead cost when some of it is actually program cost. So sometimes that can help you in getting some coverage for cost. And I think it's I think there's a lot, it's not always obvious to people, but without a program director, you cannot implement the program. So that's at least a little bit of help. But I agree with Joe that the conversation about keeping the lights on needs to happen more and more, because you can't be effective if you're not a staffed organization.
No.
Thank you for that, Jodi.
All right.
So over
Shall I
back to
kick?
you, Jen, for the
Awesome.
Q&A.
Thanks, everyone. I will put everyone now on gallery because this is essentially a free-for-all for the questions. We've got a lot of really good questions. So let's start off with the first one. Speaking towards the opaqueness of funding sources within Asia, I guess it's really up for everyone. Is there a database or website which NGOs could refer to when trying to look for grants?
Love this.
A spicy question, I would say.
Okay. Not
I don't have that information, I'm sorry. I can probably source it, but I think that you guys, Jodi and Rodney being there, might have better intel.
But could you tell us a little bit from the Australian market perspective? Because I understand Australia, New Zealand has better funding infrastructure, if you would. There are consolidated data, accumulators or amalgamators that people can actually go to research their grants. No such, as far as I know, there are very few of those in Asia.
They do, thanks to Joe and her team. I think, you need to convince Joe and her team to cover Asia as well, I think.
We do, in fact, have a database of all of the funding in Australia and New Zealand. And that is one of our key products. I can recommend that the Foundation Center Directory online out of the US does have a magnificent data set that also you can search on all of the US-based funders who will give outside of the US and target it down by country as to where they give, how much. It's just beautiful, beautiful data. Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in Asia, the foundations are, they're still developing. The foundations are still developing. And not fully, not everyone knows of their presence and awareness. And there hasn't been really an Asia. I mean, it's hard to get individual Asian countries funder information. They're not that transparent, and much less Asia-wide information. So we're still having that challenge there. So Australia, New Zealand sits in a very privileged position from an Asian fundraiser's point of view.
It was one of the most surprising things to me going from working in the US in nonprofit to Singapore was the lack of information available and finding grant opportunities.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. All right, for the next question, it was mentioned earlier that storytelling is going to be a crucial element to everything, essentially. So can you share some quick tips to help smaller nonprofits improve their storytelling?
Yeah, I think I'll take a first stab and then pass it over to Joe. But I think really understanding who your target beneficiaries are and the impact that your program is having, those two things are key. You need to paint a picture of why your organization is necessary and the impact that you're able to make. And you're trying to inspire people, whether it's individual donors or foundations or what have you. So I think as you have to think about it like a story. You have to think about what are we doing and who are we helping and pull out those different pieces. And as Joe mentioned, the more information that you have around that, the more outcome data that you have, the better.
A good way to do that is to interview the people that have benefited from the work that you do. And if you, with their permission, record that conversation or at least take notes of it, and then later on you can collate all of that beautiful, rich, we would call it qualitative data into some really powerful documents. And that's the process that we would follow when developing a case for support for an organization.
To add as well, as a tech consultant for nonprofits, I would like to highlight the underlying request there is to start investing in systems that can allow you to do that. STRM is one way. Another is really just good operational workflows that can allow you to better track impact measurement and also other relevant resources. So,
Yes. On that point, actually, on impact measurement, I mean, increasingly, I mean, I work with a lot of charities, and especially for fundraising, we do have to source case stories with the charities and the beneficiaries. It's not an easy process usually because there are a lot of approvals and consent that needs to be procured from the beneficiaries before you do the interview and the release of their image and pictures and so on. So the organizing that is a process. And if you're looking for ongoing storytelling or data collection on your outcomes and outputs, you really need to increasingly from the program side. It might be good to. I mean, there are tools now that enables the program staff to collect the outputs and outcomes as they are, doing and executing the program. So that helps alleviate a lot of the pain points in collecting all of the data and also quantitative and qualitative data, including the stories, right? We call them change stories in impact measurement language. And when you have that in place, it brings to life the impact that your organization is actually delivering, but it also acts as a repository of case stories and content that you can draw on when you want to put it in a proposal, for example, or put it in an appeal, for example. So that is, I think that's what we are increasingly developing towards as we work with our charity clients.
And one comment on that, Rodney, I guess many organisations, while they aspire to be able to get to that outcomes and track change over time, they might be 2 or 3 or, because that does take work. It does take investment to build an outcomes framework. A lot of organisations we see use a platform like eTapestries. They can also just start capturing those stories, capturing those notes, capturing those interventions, so they can at least easily report to their funders the number of sessions they're running, or, summarising, as Joe suggested, through those notes, through capturing. So using one platform to get started. So at least you get that, the culture of measurement starting to build up as you work towards getting an outcomes framework. I think my message is just get started with that. If you've got that technology, it can support that. Just get started. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, moving to the next question. This is more for Jodi, but we're more than happy to hear from the other panelists as well. So as you diversified your sources of revenue, was there a sense of targeting or prioritization in terms of key sources that happened? Was that part of the plan, or was this all kind of like a resource? Was this all just really outcomes of general campaigns? Like, for example, did you prioritize government funding, or so on and so forth?
We just went after anything we had time to go after. Was the way we started. And I think right now we're trying to reflect back on what works well for the organization. And so I think that's the other thing. All organizations have limited resources and limited manpower, right? So we're trying to go after the sources that we get the biggest bang for our buck. So we have, we're not overwhelmingly successful right now with corporate funding, for example, to get sources of funding. So we've kind of backed off of that for a little while to try to put more resources and time into something that is more effective for us right now. So we're not giving up on that strategy, but I don't want to spend 5 hours a week chasing that when I could be putting it into a grant application that I have a better chance of. So I think you just have to you just have to try it first to see what's going to work and what's going to hit. And then you have to keep on top of your feedback loop and make sure that you prioritize what's going to work for your organization, I think. That's what I would say. Joe, any?
Sorry, I would 100% agree with that. I think that constant monitoring and evaluation of your own performance is critical. You've got to track how everything is going, and if something's not working, examine why it's not working. And if it's just a no-go, in the case of grants, there are going to be deadlines that come up that you think they're nearly right for you, but not quite. And then on speaking with the funder, they confirm, no, it's not quite there. So the hardest decision to make is not to go ahead with a funding application, for example. So there are different fundraising methodologies for different organizations. They're not all going to suit all organizations. And it's really important that you do work out what's relevant to your beneficiaries and stakeholders, and what your leadership has the capacity to invest in and grow.
Thanks, everyone. Another question here is really about sustainability, the concept of sustainability. It can be a very complex subject. They just want to understand, how do you quantify this? How do you simplify this, particularly for a small organization? What are the factors that you need to think about so as to say, oh yes, my operation is sustainable?
I think that you need to be able to show enough evidence that you're going to be around for at least the next 3 years, and that, again, going back to what both Jodi and I have already covered, just showing all that evidence of success to date, having business forecasts of what your profit projections, what your profit and loss look like, what your fundraising plans look like. That all sort of leads to sustainability. But in my mind, sustainability is your ability to keep on going and delivering your mission. And then there might be specific questions around project sustainability for specific applications. That's a trickier one. But, a common response there is, again, that, well, these are all the other different fundraising methods and they're growing, and we predict the growth to be this much. And if it is, then we would have enough money to then self-fund that project, or make a case to government to fund it. That could be the case as well. So it's about gathering that evidence so that we've got a really strong case to put to government to fund it. And once they sort of step into the equation, I think it puts a vote of confidence around an organization's sustainability as well.
I think I can add to that as well. Just in case people don't know, I actually used to be the director of fundraising at Save the Children, so rather large organization. So, my experience working with funders is that just like Joe was saying, there are a few levels in which they might look at. I think first and foremost, when you do an application, they might look at it from a program level. And at a program level, they can actually ask whether or not the program is actually a fee generating program. So a lot of programs, increasingly, there might be a fee collecting element. So that might help in terms of the long-term sustainability of the program itself. Okay, and whether there are any other collaborative partners that actually work with as well on that particular program, who might step in and do a rotational funding or do a co-funding model, etc. So that also helps in terms of the longer-term sustainability of a particular program that you're putting in. Or increasingly, they're also looking at whether or not you can morph that into a social enterprise. So introduce a little bit of a commercial element into that program as well. So I think that's one level. The other level is just like Joe was saying, they might look at it from an organizational perspective. So that's where all of your financial statements, your previous financial statements, your audited financial statements, and your reserves in your organization might also come in to determine what the sustainability or how sustainable is your business operation going forward. All right, and of course the fundraising as well. Okay.
Thanks, guys. Another question. Now we're going to talk more about a thematic concept that's a bit more popular now. So this is really about donor fatigue. So the question was, how does charities manage this? And do you see donors now being more like it was mentioned earlier that it's more competitive now. Fundraising is more competitive. Does this equate to donor fatigue from a donor's perspective? And for a smaller charity, how do you navigate this, particularly since the field is now more competitive than ever, and factor in that donors are becoming a bit more tired, or at least that is what is perceived to be. So what are your thoughts on that, I'd say?
Over to you, Joe.
I think donor fatigue is really a term more used for individual giving. So it's not really my ballpark. Sorry.
Don't you see donor fatigue happening on the institutional or the foundational level?
No, because they're established to give money away. That's their purpose. So if that's what they do, and a lot of them are bound to do that, but because of the deeds of the trust or whatnot. So no, I don't. I think it's an individual donor question.
What about rotational in terms of the types of programs that they fund? Don't they need to rotate? Do some donors rotate the grantors every couple of years? We see that in Asia.
There are some that will say that if you've had a grant, you can only apply again in 3 years' time. But no, I would say 90% of the time, it comes down to those organisations who manage relationships really well get repeat funding.
I think it was like, Jodi, from your perspective, because at a certain point in time, Love NILS was highly dependent on individual giving. What were your thoughts on the concept of donor fatigue, and how were you able to weather that as you continue to diversify your revenue sources?
Yeah, it's still a concern for us, for sure. And I think the thing that helps us to cut through the noise a little bit is to have like an event or a more targeted campaign, because the consistent ask of just donate now, donate now, donate now. My feeling, and I'm not an expert on this, but my feeling is that it becomes noise after a while. And so if we have something that's a little bit more, it grabs more attention a couple times a year, we seem to be more effective then. So, but interestingly, one of our board members shared with us that folks are actually giving more right now virtually because of the reduced interaction in the world, I guess. So rather than because of the fact that people aren't out volunteering, or they're not, at their churches more as often, or whatever it might be, not at as many fundraising events, that in some places they're seeing more online giving. And maybe that's what explains why we've had a successful crowdfunding campaign recently. But we've had several people that have started campaigns for us on giving platforms. We had one this morning. So yeah, we're just trying to ride that. But I think if you have something that grabs a little bit more attention every now and then, I think it helps you, because it does become noise, and that is a concern, right? You can't ask all the time because people will tune out.
I highly agree with that. At a marketing level, you also have to balance out what your calls to action are. Some might just be for building awareness. Space that out with others that actually require something like a quantifiable action, such as donating. So I highly agree.
Yeah.
Right, Greg?
Yeah, and globally, online giving grew significantly in the last year. So it had its biggest growth ever. And it's really, that's happened in the last year. So we do benchmarking across the globe in terms of philanthropy, and certainly online giving has grown significantly. And I think also, if you think about, if you're battling away with an Excel spreadsheet and MailChimp and you're blasting out, well, you're going to see donor fatigue, aren't you? Versus having a ability to segment, understand the interest, understand this volunteer made their first donation, or that this group has they gave last year, but they haven't given this year, but maybe they just haven't heard from you. So it's all those things that really systematically, if you can start to improve your processes, you build a better donor experience and awareness, and that's got to make a difference. So I would challenge that to say, think about that donor fatigue, literally what's causing it. Is it just the lack of that connection you're building?
Thanks, everyone. Now, on to a more resource question. As you diversify your funds, naturally you will be bombarded with a wealth of new information, new funders, new sources. What are the best tips to manage that? I think the first part of the question is more for Greg. What are the tools that can help you manage that? And the second part is any tips that can make post-donation campaigns more effective? And what are the kinds of post-donation campaigns that a nonprofit can run?
Well, I guess at its simplest level, just going to an online donation page, making a donation, immediately getting acknowledgement. The acknowledgement might provide some great impact stories, tell a story, back it up with some of the data you've collected. Just that very first point is so important, just that engagement. But then is it then does it pop into a dashboard and someone picks up the phone and thanks that donor as a simple measure? Do they get a welcome kit as a new donor? Do they, as I said before, get acknowledged as that they volunteered in the past? So you're thanking them for the volunteering and the fact they became a donor. It's having that program that knowing in the next 90 days, because there's research about this, that you want to not ask them again, but actually just share awareness about the work you do. So then if you make an ask within 90 days, research shows the likelihood of people giving is dramatically increased, but the likelihood of that individual becoming connected to your cause and giving again is also drastically increased. So simply a platform can help you take the mundane away from actually doing that. You can automate that. It can streamline the processing and how it feeds through to the financial system, which gives you time back to think about that segmentation, thinking about that fantastic campaign that'll have a breakthrough. Working with your corporate sponsors, maybe you can do a dollar matching program or whatever. It's giving you more time to be strategic because you've taken away the mundane and creating that great donor experience. And that's what a platform can do at its simplest level.
And a resourcing perspective, please reach out to Rodney and Greg and Blackbaud in general. They can help you find the proper platform that can help you do these in an automated manner. But Jodi, do you have other thoughts as well in terms of the resourcing and post-donation campaigns that a nonprofit can run? All good? Okay. I think we have enough time just for one last question, then we can cap it off. It has been a very engaging conversation. Thank you to the crowd and thank you to our wonderful panelists. To ask for the last question, it is really all about, in terms of, as you diversify, naturally you're going to, during the transition to diversification, naturally you're going to come to a point where your funds will be stretched. You will be coming to a point that it is going to be a bit financially uncomfortable because you're still exploring, right? So from your perspective, what are your tips on managing that transitionary time? Or what are your tips on a cost-saving approach in terms of operations? And what are your thoughts on building up reserves and savings as part of sustainability?
Rodney, do you want to?
Sure, okay, I can do that. I can share my experience.
Yeah.
Actually, been through this for quite a significant, large a few organizations actually. It's quite a challenging question. I think you have to work together first and foremost with your board. It's very important to understand the board's strategic directive because they are. The direction for the organization is basically where you then allocate the budget you have to each of the different operational needs of the organization, be it in program, be it in fundraising, be it in reserves, etc. So I think in that transitory period, you do actually have to have the engagement of the board and the support of the board and the input of the board. What I want to say, I suppose, is that a lot of times when you reach that sort of tipping point where you are scaling up as an organization and trying to diversify, you will find that there's probably a greater need to invest in the capacity of the organization, the other aspects of the organization, the non-programmatic aspect of the organization, right? So that's where all of these challenges are going to come in, because previously the organization is so focused on just delivering on the mission, delivering for the beneficiaries and so on. And suddenly you have to take a step back and say, like, we need to invest in the sustainability. And that means investing in systems, investing in people, right? Investing in your marketing and sales. And these are not like the core delivery of your organization, which is the charitable services. Now that in a way is a little bit of a culture shift for your organization. So it's not an easy process to go through, and but it's essential for the organization to do that step, because that's the basis of your business continuity, if you would. Because if you don't actually have those in place, then your diversified funding base for your future growth and your future sustainability will not be put in place. So if you don't get the mandate to invest in all of those, it's a struggle going forward, all right? So a lot of organizations, for example, have been solely reliant on either event fundraising or maybe just a couple of major givers, grantors, pre-COVID. And when COVID struck, some of those the events, especially in Hong Kong, events have been wiped out because there is no events income anymore. And some funders might have gone under. They're not able. So without a diversified funding base, they really had to some close down basically as a result, right? So I would say there needs to be an organizational imperative to actually take on that piece to move in that direction. I don't know if that fully answers your question, Greg. Yeah, I mean Jed. Sorry.
Yeah, it's still very helpful. Actually, despite going through lean times, you also have to upskill to find better ways to optimize and ensure the sustainability of your program. And I totally agree with that. It is a bit of a cultural shift. You're going to be put in spots where you're going to be uncomfortable, but if anything, those are creative or positive disruptions that will essentially put you in a corner where you have to innovate, upskill, think of ways to improve your operation.
I want to add to that is that it's a little bit counterintuitive, because ironically, during the COVID times, a lot of organizations cut their budget in terms of the capacity or the marketing and so on, because obviously it's lean times, everyone cut that sort of non-essential budget. So what they try to do is they try and shift the fundraising focus to from foundations and grantors, right? And that makes sense because that's the cheapest way of fundraising. You just need to write a proposal in, right? But as Joe was saying, suddenly there's a spike in everyone did the same strategy, so everyone piled into the foundation, the foundation fundraising, and which means like it got really, really competitive. Okay, but ironically, individual fundraising, because a lot of individuals were not able to travel, were not able to go abroad, so they actually have excess. They actually have excess spending power. I mean, we see this in the data. It's coming in the fundraising campaigns, and of course, major givers also have excess spending. They also can't travel, and they also can't do. So as a result, we were getting a lot of positive. I mean, I know Australia was also getting a lot of very good fundraising results from individual givers, right? So it was very counterintuitive. You have thought that individual givers would have dropped off and all of that, but with the COVID situation, so everyone went into the foundation piece. But ironically, that had a lot of competition, but the individual giving piece actually produced a lot of revenue for those who were still doing that. So, but excluding face-to-face, of course, because that was on the street. But direct mailing and all, they did very well. And just like Greg was saying, digital shot up. and that's from individual givers as well. So just be a little bit careful in that your personal, if you think, you might think like, okay, the trend is like to go for foundation, but that might not be how practical realities work out. Okay, practical realities might mean something counterintuitive to what we think initially. Okay.
Thanks, Rodney. Jodi, would you like to share one quick last messages to the crowd before we close off?
No, I think just there's been some amazing exemplary advice given. So, you've got access to this recording now. I would just heed all of that great information and go forth and fundraise successfully.
Jodi?
I agree with those sentiments, and I think just exploring what's going to work for your organization. You have to, you don't know what your success is going to look like for grants or for individuals or with corporates until you give it a try. So just doing research and putting your best foot forward and seeing what works is my biggest advice. It's not always going to work, but it can be quite successful. So good luck.
Thanks, Jodi. Thanks, Joe. And again, that being said, I understand we are a bit over time, but thank you for sticking on. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for sharing all of your expertise, Blackbaud for helping us host this, and to everybody who attended. These are tough times, but we're here. We are a community. We're here to share advice, and also organizations like Blackbaud, like TechSoup are here to provide you with access to resources that are helpful to help you optimize and really just weather the storm. Thank you again. Recordings and copies of the slides will be shared in a few days. Give us some time to compile these, as well as some of the questions that haven't been answered. Thank you again, and have a lovely day ahead.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.